Welcome to Football's Golden Oldies from the Toll House in Lancaster. This is part one of the Brian Clough story. Walking on water, some Brian Clough quotes, and there's no shortage of them. Football hooligans? Well, there are 92 football club chairmen for a start. There are more hooligans in the House of Commons than at a football match. Players lose your games, not tactics. There's so much crap talked about tactics by people who barely know how to win at dominoes. Rome wasn't built in a day, but I wasn't on that particular job. Beckham, his wife can't sing and his barber can't cut hair. We talk about it for 20 minutes and then decide I was right. I wouldn't say I was the best manager in the business, but I was in the top one. We had a good team on paper, but unfortunately the game was played on grass. When one of his players got concussed, the doctor said, "The player doesn't know who he is." And Clough, full of sympathy, said, "Tell him he's Pelly and to get on with the bloody game." A summary of a man who always seemed to exist at the eye of the storm. Brian Clough was no ordinary football manager. He walked on water at Nottingham Forest and walked through hellfire at one or two other clubs without ever conceding an inch to anybody. As a young crew-cut Middlesbrough centre-forward, Clough would swagger into the dressing room, fling his flat cap onto a peg and draw crowds of 30,000 with his goals. What is it that makes him, in spite of the storms and sackings, the most inspiring and quotable figure in the history of football? We will look at the knee injury that crippled him as a player, then at the outspoken Hartlepool's manager who toppled the chairman, the idolised Derby County manager who resigned when his team was poised to beat the world, the soon-to-be sacked Leeds manager who told Revy's men they had won all their trophies by cheating and by being dirty players, the triumphant Nottingham Forest boss who took his team from nowhere to the peak of Europe, the heartbreaking sadness of his descent into alcoholism that he didn't beat. He was born into what sort of world? Brian Howard Clough was born on March 21st, 1935, joining a family of 8 on the Grove Hill Council estate, a neat modern house kept like a palace, whitewashed front doorstep and so spotless inside you could eat off the floor. His brother Bill said, as a young lad Brian had strong opinions. He wouldn't be downtrodden and demanded his rights, taking after our mum Sally. All the kids passed their 11 plus exams except Brian, who could only seem to concentrate on football. His school teacher Tony Rowell said, after 40 years teaching, Brian sticks out in my memory. He was bright and alert and had an opinion on everything, finishing near the top of the class in every subject, but was outstanding at all games. Mum Sally was so proud of Brian. When Brian was made head boy at Martin Grove, her face lit up with a smile, and it gave her more pleasure, pride and satisfaction than his football career. Being head boy gave him a certain amount of power which he couldn't get from academic channels or being the best behaved. Imagine his shock and horror when he left school at 15 and had to follow his mum's advice and get a nice job at the local ICI as a fitter and turner. Getting through those huge gates with his sandwiches and a bottle of pop was like entering a different world, and even when they tried to explain what fitting and turning was, Brian was never cut out for it. He experienced terror when he was taken down a mine and soon abandoned his apprenticeship by becoming a junior clerk. He was called up for his square bashing at Padgate near Manchester, where leading aircraftsman Clough was picked for the station but not for the National RAF side, much to his disappointment. Clough could have slipped through the net. On leaving school, Brian played for Great Broughton in the Cleveland League, which wasn't the ideal shop window for him to display his talents against men. Word got round that the village had a demon centre forward, and George Camsell, the former Middlesbrough and England centre forward, who scored 59 goals in a season, came to watch him. It was always said that George Camsell discovered Brian Clough, but after digging deeper, I found that wasn't the case. George's report rejected Clough and said he won't make the grade. Ray Grant, headmaster at Hugh Bell Secondary Modern School, persisted and sent a message to Middlesbrough. Ignore previous report from Camsell, this boy can play. He signed as an amateur in 1951, turning professional a year later, then 2 years national service before returning to Middlesbrough, a Division 2 club, in 1955. Remarkable record in scoring goals. 1956, 3, 57, 40, 58, 42, 59, 43, 60, 40, 61, 36, total 204 goals in 222 games, goals per game of 92 in 100 games, phenomenal. And if you look at the second division now, which is called the conference or something, or the championship, which is a load of rubbish, can you tell me anybody else in that league who scores like Brian Clough? No, there isn't anybody. National service ends. Brian stayed in Somerset for 20 months and was then discharged to return to Middlesbrough, where he scored at various levels but remained their fifth choice centre forward until Peter Taylor, reserve team goalkeeper, stepped in and said, "I can't work out what's going on here. You're the best player in the club." Brian certainly didn't rate manager Bob Dennison as he made his first team debut at Barnsley, who didn't have any encouragement for his young centre forward. Home games saw him sat in the dressing room, outside left, inside left, Clough, Jimmy James, comedian, smoking a cigar, puffing huge clouds of smoke, and then Eli. April 4th, 1959 saw Brian marry Barbara, you can see in the photograph, who he had courted for 2 years, a few days honeymoon in London before playing Liverpool at Anfield on the Wednesday. 2 goals in the final minutes cemented the win, and Shankly said to Harold Shepherdson, "He's not had a kick," to which Harold, who wasn't known for his slick repartee, said, "He's had at least 2 to my knowledge, Bill." Clough senses a nasty smell. I remember the season at Middlesbrough when I scored 43 goals in 42 league games and we didn't get promotion because the centre-half was letting them in as fast as I was scoring them, and Brian Phillips eventually finished up in Pentonville prison and was banned from football. After a 6-6 draw with Charlton Athletic, Clough sarcastically asked his teammates how many goals he would have to score to win a match. Before Clough had become a first-team regular, there had been the peculiar case of Rolando Ugolini, the Scottish goalkeeper who preceded Peter Taylor. Borough were drawing 2-2 at Port Vale when Ugolini appeared to allow a soft shot to bobble into the net for the Port Vale winner. On the coach after the game, Ugolini heard the football results and shouted, "I've got the treble! Aston Villa, Rangers and Port Vale." The other players almost lynched him. One of the players picked him up by the lapels and said, "My kids could have had a new pair of shoes if it hadn't been for you, you bastard." Ugolini never played for Middlesbrough again, but there was nothing illegal in his actions, as the growing custom was to hedge your bets by going for a defeat. If the team won, you got your bonus. If it lost, you won the bet. Why so few England caps? Clough always believed that Harold Shepherdson obstructed his international progress, and selector Harry French, a Middlesbrough director and greengrocer, so he's obviously qualified to be a director, wasn't forthcoming with a recommendation, as in those days England selectors nominated players of their choice. It does seem strange that with two such influential figures in the club, the most prolific scorer in the country managed only 2 caps for England. Of course, Brian did not assist his own cause by being so openly anti-establishment. Walter Winterbottom thought Derek Kevin of West Bromwich Albion was slow as a cart horse, did not have the class, but impressed with his work rates. What a commendation from the man who was called Washerwoman by Len Shackleton. Winterbottom wanted Clough in the team to play Yugoslavia, but was overruled by the bewhiskered gentleman selectors. The team lost 5-0 and Winterbottom took Brian aside to tell him he wasn't in the squad for the 1958 World Cup in Sweden. Clough confronted Shepherdson and said, "I scored 42 goals this season for Middlesbrough, but apparently it wasn't good enough for you and the Football Association." Short international career, 2 games. Brian made his debut for England in Cardiff against Wales on October 17, 1959, in front of 60,000 fans, which ended 1-1 with Jimmy Greaves scoring for England. October 28, 1959, England played Sweden at Wembley before 72,000 fans, paying 10 and 6 to watch Clough and Greaves, who scored 673 goals jointly in their club careers. England lost 3-2 to the World Cup runners-up, with the dynamic duo failing to score, although Clough hit the post and the bar. After his last game for England, Brian said, "I was cast aside by a manager, Walter Winterbottom, a man who did not know his job." And the photo shows Brian chatting to Jimmy Greaves at Highbury during a training session before the Sweden game. Many years later, Jimmy Greaves, a TV presenter by then, asked Brian, "Have you learned from your mistakes in management?" To which Brian answered, "What mistakes?" England career ends. Brian's debut for England on October 17, 1959 was against Wales in Cardiff, and he hardly got a kick, with Graham Moore equalising the Jimmy Greaves goal with the last shot of an awful game. His second game for England was against Sweden at Wembley, that Sweden won 3-2, and it could have been worse. Greaves said, "They took us apart, we didn't know which day of the week it was, and Clough was anonymous in the game, but so were we all." When somebody pointed out to Brian that he hadn't seen much of the ball, Clough responded in typical fashion, "What do you expect? How can I play centre forward alongside Charlton and Greaves when we're all going for the same ball?" Greaves realised Brian was right and thought it was daft to put the 3 of them together, Greaves, Clough and Charlton. Bob Dennison, the Middlesbrough manager, was at Wembley to watch the game, and he told Winterbottom he would have to drop either Greaves or Charlton, which might have been the final nail in the coffin, or the international coffin, for Brian Clough. Transfer request accepted and Clough leaves Middlesbrough. In July 1961, one of Clough's transfer requests was finally accepted, and he moved to Middlesbrough's local rivals, Sunderland, for either 55,000 or 42,000. Some sources say 40,000 because that is what Sunderland insured him for. With Sunderland, Clough scored a total of 63 goals in 74 matches, a goals per game ratio of 0.85. We see manager Alan Brown seated front row centre, with Brian in the second row, 2 places from the right. But can you see what absolutely enraged Alan Brown? Everybody's smiling at the camera and Brian Clough's got a pipe in his mouth. September 9th, 1961, with Walter Crossley of Lancaster in charge. And we can see Dunrevy can only look on as the irrepressible Clough rounds Leeds keeper Alan Humphreys for his second goal in Sunderland's 2-1 win at Roker Park in September 61. And on the right, we highlight Walter Crossley, the referee, and most of us in this room would play in a football game that Walter would ref in the local league. End of the road. In the 62-63 season, Brian had scored 24 league goals by December as Sunderland pushed for promotion, now named the Bank of England club because of transfer fees paid out. In a Boxing Day match against Bury at Roker Park on December 26, 1962, in icy conditions and torrential rain, Clough was put through on goal and collided with goalkeeper Chris Harker. He tore medial and cruciate ligaments in his knee. An injury in that era usually ended a player's career. He returned 2 years later, but could manage only 3 games, scoring his only goal in the First Division, and then he retired from playing at the age of 29. Clough's manager was Alan Brown, a disciplinarian credited as a big influence on Brian, who inspired fear, a strict code of conduct, and fined players for minor transgressions. Such traits would later be adopted by Clough when he became a manager. Apart from inspiring fear, he did nothing of the sort. Of players who have scored over 200 goals in the English leagues, Clough has the highest goals per game ratio of 0.92, meaning he scored 9 goals in every 10 matches. Clough never forgave Bob Stokoe, Bury's centre half, and the big mouth as well. When his head hit the ground, everything went black. But he soon came round. He couldn't get up, so he crawled and heard the voice of Bob Stokoe saying in his Geordie accent, "Come on, ref, he's cod him and play acting." Referee Kevin Howley replied, "Not this lad, I've known him a long time, and he doesn't cod." Clough said later, "I'll never forgive Stokoe for that," and he never did. It was 1964 before Brian attempted a comeback which failed after 3 games, by which time Sunderland had a new manager, George Hardwick, former Middlesbrough and England captain, who said Brian was a very sick and sad young man. He hated every member of the club, from the first team to the A team, because they were doing something he couldn't, play football. Hardwick called Brian into his office saying, "You're not going to get paid for doing naught. I want you back every afternoon to work with the youngsters." To which Clough said, "Are you serious, boss? When do I start?" "This afternoon," said George. George said Brian was a revelation. His mind was occupied. He was achieving something, and I made him new team manager. I loved his way of coaching, always encouraging. Too many enemies in the boardroom. Clough qualified as an FA coach and had a huge influence on John O'Hare, who he would take to Derby, Leeds and Forest in future years. O'Hare said Brian completely changed the training routine from just lapping the field to working with the ball. We would cross the ball and he would lash it into the net. He was a real inspiration to me, and I cannot thank him enough. Hardwick was told by Laurie Evans, the clueless Sunderland vice chairman, What do you mean by making Clough manager of the youth team? We want Clough out of the club, and as soon as we get the insurance money, he's out of the door. George said, "You're talking crazy. This man has a natural talent for getting players to play." Evans replied, "I don't care, get him out." Hardwick, "No way, he's doing a hell of a job, and in 2 years he'll be my right-hand man." At the end of the season, Hardwick was sacked, and 10 days later, Clough received his marching orders. George explained, "I was fired because I stood by Brian and refused to climb down. Any fool could see that. That's how much they despised him. But I don't regret what I did because I had faith in him, and together we could have formed a partnership as successful as the one he had with Peter Taylor." Sunderland collected £40,000 compensation. Clough got £1,000 and with help from Hardwick made £5,000 from a testimonial at Roker Park before disappearing almost off the face of the earth. Perfect partnership? Clough and Peter Taylor were inseparable at Middlesbrough, Monday to Friday, always together talking football. And 3 months after his sacking, Brian was thankful that another friend appeared. It was the clown prince of soccer, Len Shackleton, the great Len, who recommended Clough to Ernest Ord, the miniature chairman of Hartlepool United, for the manager's job. Taylor hadn't seen Brian for almost 4 years and saw how his bright-eyed adventurer friend had lost his spark and said if it had been any longer, Brian would have gone to pot. He was a no-hoper, boozing heavily and on his way out. Peter Taylor was managing Burton Albion, a Southern League club, when they met in the Chase Hotel, York, where they agreed to go into partnership. He made the trip to York on the strength of Clough's phone call. "I've been offered the manager's job at Hartlepool's. I don't fancy it or the man who made the offer, but if you'll come, I'll take it." Taylor would have to sacrifice half his wages, but the lure of a league club, however run down, was irresistible, and people had said you could drop off the edge of the world going to Hartlepool's. Hartlepool's were always seeking re-election. Ernest Ord, Hartlepool's Napoleonic chairman, did not like the idea of paying 2 salaries, but was presented with a fait accompli, saying, "Clough didn't consult me at all, just recruited Taylor off his own bat, and I didn't like him at all, but went along with it because I wanted Clough." It was Shackleton who told Brian that he would be better off with Taylor, realising that they needed each other in the remarkable way in which they fed off each other. Taylor had to content himself with a trainer's salary, £24 a week, plus the chairman put them into a couple of his houses at the seaside resort of Seaton Carew and charged a modest rent. John Curry, a director, said, "The hours that Brian put in were nobody's business, trailing from club to club and pub to pub, seeking money, and he put a new roof on the stand, had floodlights installed and loved every minute of it, but he was on his knees by the time he went home." Hartlepool's finished 8th from bottom in 55-56. That was satisfactory enough, but Brian's first impression of Ord was correct. He was a tyrant, a nasty little man at 5 foot tall with a complex. Ord now decided to break up their partnership, but Brian rallied enough support from a downtrodden board, plus John Curry, to banish Ord and replace him with Curry himself. The unearth a gold nugget. Tommy Johnson, the trainer, was told by Clough to organise a trial match for the youngsters. And after about 30 minutes, Clough said to him, "There's not much here, Tommy, but that young man will do." It was a frail 16-year-old who had a funny waddle, but was 2-footed and could put the ball exactly where he wanted. And this Funny little young lad with a funny waddle. Brian signed him 4 times in 10 years and every negotiation lasted 30 seconds or so. Shortly before moving to Derby, Clough and McGovern were sat on the bench for the Bradford Park Avenue game and Brian said, "Watch Bradford's number 10, because when we leave Hartlepool, we're going to take you with us and 2 others, and the number 10 is one of them." He was Kevin Hector, but he was at Derby already when Clough arrived. On the final day of the 65-66 season, he introduced John McGovern to the first team in a 1-1 draw against Bradford City. Clough would go on to sign McGovern at Derby, Leeds and Notts Forest. And you can see Brian learning to drive the team coach to save money. That autumn morning, McGovern had unwittingly taken the first step along the road, which would lead to 2 European Cup victories, 2 league championships, 2 League Cup wins and a sideboard full of assorted hardware. Taylor asked Len Shackleton to find them another club, and sure enough, Len arranged for Brian to meet with Derby County Chairman Sam Longson at Scotch Corner, where the deal was done and the dynamic duo moved from the basement of football to the 2nd Division in May 1967. Clough meets Derby chairman at Scotch Corner with Shackleton. It was Len Shackleton who got Clough and Taylor their first jobs at Hartlepool and Derby. Shack still had many contacts in the game, and with his footballing reputation, he could still convince most people in football to agree with his ideas. And the wonderful footballer, Clough and Taylor, Sam Longson, who was irrelevant really, and the great Len Shackleton. Brian Clough was universally seen as a hard but fair manager who insisted on clean play from his players and broke no stupid questions from the press. He was famous for insisting on being called Mr. Clough and earned great respect from his peers for his ability to turn a game to his and his team's advantage. Sadly, as he grew older, his drinking problem got out of hand, and unlike Jimmy Greaves, he didn't go to Alcoholics Anonymous. He's a strange man to place in any particular category, but for all his strange ways, I've never heard one of his former players criticise him. Brian Clough's mentor was Harry Storer. I often say that everybody needs a mentor in football. I think every great manager has a mentor, and Brian Clough and Peter Taylor were no exceptions to this rule, because whenever Brian and Peter met Harry, they would talk for hours, sometimes as late as 4 o'clock in the morning. Harry played over 300 cricket games for Derbyshire in 16 years, winning the county championship. From 1919 to 31, he played almost 400 league games for Grimsby, Derby, Burnley and twice for England. From 31 to 63, he managed Coventry with Peter Taylor in goal, Birmingham and Derby, and died in California in September 1967. When I read that in his book, I thought, Harry Storer must have made a hell of a lot of money out of football to end his days in America, in California. But then I found out that California is a district of Derby, not the state in America. Harry Storer was a great teacher and a coach, and late in life he became a scout for Everton, filing a one-word report on a player. And all he said to Harry Catterick was, "He's a coward." And that is why Clough and Taylor always looked for moral courage in every player they signed. Harry Storer believed in building a team from the back, goalkeeper, centre-half and centre-forward, and Clough and Taylor followed this advice exactly. Harry told a trainee hairdresser to whom he'd given a trial that he should sell his boots and buy another pair of scissors. In the 1960s, Storer scouted for Harry Catterick at Everton, and as I said, sent in a report on a player that contained one word: coward. Clough was a late addition of Shack. Brian Clough was a great friend of Len Shackleton, and it was Shack who got him his first 2 managerial jobs, so Clough referred to his friend many, many times in the years later like this. Len Shackleton left an entire page blank in his book, reserved for what he believed directors knew about football. If I'd had my way, there would be a blank chapter in this book dedicated to the same amateurs. I've never understood why men with such poor knowledge, or no knowledge at all, insist they know more about the game in general than the needs of management in particular. I think that still applies now. The vast majority, 98% of them, knew nothing in my days as a player, nothing in my time as a manager, and the modern lot still know nothing today, yet I continue to see them quoted in newspapers or droning on in television interviews, trying to convince the public and themselves that they have the faintest idea of how football works. It makes my blood boil. It makes me want to put my foot through the television screen, and I would have done it long before now, but I've a dodgy deed to look after. Chairmen and directors are still balmy. That is one of the reasons why there's such a high turnover. So many sackings explained by that cosy little phrase, by mutual agreement. And it's nothing of the sort, that they should never have been given the job in the first place. Everything at a football club is dependent on the man who creates and selects the team. Historic baseball ground is now home. Derby County had been rooted in the second division for a decade before Clough's arrival in May '67, their only major trophy being the FA Cup in 1946. In his first season, the club finished one place lower than in the previous season, but he'd started to lay the foundations for his future success by signing several new players, among them Roy McFarlane, John O'Hare, John McGovern, Alan Hinton and Les Green. Of the inherited squad, 11 players departed with 4 retained: Kevin Hector, Alan Durbin, Ron Webster and Colin Baldwin. And Clough also sacked the club secretary, the groundsman and the chief scout, as well as two tea ladies he caught laughing after a Derby defeat. So nobody was safe from Brian. Photo shows Clough with his players, and he said to the chairman, "I'll sack the bloody lot of them." He was almost as good as his word. And that's the end of the first part of Brian Clough.